Thank you for joining all of us here at Portland State University's Center for Entrepreneurship for a panel discussion on the future of transportation. We will be joined shortly by PSU alums who have become the top innovators in their field. They will be discussing what the future of automation in transportation means for consumers and corporations, ways transportation innovations are working to create cleaner vehicles, and how important it is to look at inclusivity and outreach when working with municipalities and public transportation initiatives. Leading the conversation is Angela Jackson, who, as a co-founder of the Portland Seed Fund, is a driving force in bringing new ideas to market. These efforts have helped more than 100 high-growth companies take on innovations in technology, energy, health, and consumer products. We are honored to have her with us today. Please welcome Angela Jackson.
Welcome. I'm Angela Jackson, and it's my pleasure to host and moderate this panel today. This is a panel for PSU students, innovators, by PSU alum, engaged in innovation and entrepreneurship. It's my pleasure to welcome Lori Heino Royer and Nat Parker, both PSU alum. And we're going to have a great conversation today about the future of transportation. But before we get into it, let's hear a little bit more about each of our panelists. Let me start with introducing Lori Heino Royer. After a stellar career at Daimler Trucks North America, she's followed her heart and passion and launched a startup of her own called CEOX that elevates women into CEO roles. We're going to hear more about that from Lori in a second. We also have Nat Parker, who formed Globe Sherpa as a master's student at the School of Business with his partner. They sold the company to Movil, and he has had great success scaling that company. He's now returned to Portland with his fantastic family and just taken a role as COO with Traffic Technology Services. So I'm going to hand it over to Lori to do an expanded bio and talk a little bit about your journey story. Go ahead and take a few minutes. Remember, we're talking to people who are thinking a lot about all the moves in their lives and connecting the dots. You know, they may know where they want to end up, but they may not know how all the little stops along the way get them there. And then I'm going to ask Nat to do the same. So Lori.
Great. Well, thank you, Angela, for such a great introduction. So I'm Lori Heino Royer. I spent almost 20 years at Daimler Trucks North America. When I first joined Daimler, I was working on my MBA at PSU. Previous to that, I had attained an accounting degree, and I entered Daimler through the finance and accounting space. I quickly learned that I didn't want to be behind the scenes accounting for things after they happened, but I wanted to be in the forefront of where all the action was happening in business. The MBA was my path towards getting there and enhancing the skills that I already had. So at Daimler, I started in the finance and accounting space, and I quickly moved from there into the sales organization, where really everything is happening at the very front of it. And what I used is my finance skills in that space to structure deals and make sure that the deals were structured financially viable for both us as Daimler and for the customer. From that role, I went into the back end operations of how to make salespeople more successful and really running all of the back end things of what it takes to provide them with the tools that they need from a very large organization. From that role, I went into strategy, innovation, and project management, where I really had a view of the entire organization. So our teams had tentacles in every different spot, whether it was manufacturing or our operations in Mexico, sales, marketing, any of the different pieces of the organization. And what our job was to do is to say, what's happening in the world around us, and how do we take those things and bring them into Daimler and make Daimler more effective with all of the changes that are happening in the outside world. And to that point, I will say that listening is the skill that I think has taken me the farthest in my career, of really being able to listen to what's happening, not only with my ears, but with my eyes and with everything around me, to say, how is this ever going to impact us as a company? And what can I do to make it better for our company? And then the last role I had at Daimler was more in the technology space, moving into working with the autonomous trucks and then the really smart technology that's coming into the vehicles and bringing them into current standards with all of the tech trends. I left in January of 2020 to live in Costa Rica with my family, and got to spend the first 2 months there before we got cut short with COVID. And then I ended up back in Portland, and I met my co-founder, who is also very interested in trying to help women get into more senior roles. And so we've co-founded a company called CEOX, and we work on elevating women, and we partner with venture capital organizations so that when they're going in on an A or a B round and they're needing to replace a CEO, that we can source candidates that are ideal for them.
That's really awesome to hear. I want to point out something else about Lori that she's not saying. It's hard for me to think of a PSU alum who has busted open the doors as boldly as Lori in terms of making her company source talent from interns all the way up to people who, have had senior careers by now at DTNA. And how if we take one thing away from today, it's not all about technology. It's about, innovation's about busting open some doors, but it's as much about who do you link arms with and bring with you. So let's give Nat a chance to tell us a little bit about his career stages. And I know enough about Nat to say they're not all linear, which resonates with me because that's true for my career path too. So Nat.
Yeah, thanks, Angela. And thank you, Juan, for inviting me to the panel. Lori is awesome. She's a rock star. For those of you who are watching, reach out to her, learn from her. She helped mentor me along the way, as did Angela. So two awesome ladies here. I was lucky to start at PSU as well. So I was a grad student in the Masters of International Management program. So, I did not have a business background. I came to PSU thinking, I think I want to be an entrepreneur. I had spent 2 years in West Africa. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. Loved the ingenuity and the sort of startup mentality that existed among people everywhere there, and came back to Portland and knew I wanted to go into business. And in my first marketing class at PSU, our professor, Brian McCarthy, challenged us to come up with a business plan for a new product or service of our choosing. It didn't have to exist. And I wrote a plan for Globe Sherpa, which was a guide to your world. The idea was a smartphone app. This was right when the iPhone had debuted. So it's sort of old news now, but back then I said, what if you could take a travel guide and put it on your iPhone? And so I wrote a plan for it. One of my colleagues or classmates in the program, Michael Gray, read the plan and came to me and said, "Hey man, this is really cool. Are you going to do this?" And I said, I don't know the first thing about technology. He said, "I'm a software architect. I can help you. Let's get together." And that was the beginning of a bromance that lasted many years. And so Michael and I sort of went through various iterations of what that technology could be, what the business idea was. And ultimately we landed on serving the public sector with innovative solutions around mobile technology, in particular payments. And as we got deeper, we ended up building really the nation's first mobile ticketing and payment application for multimodal transit. So for TriMet, we built the TriMet Tickets app. You no longer had to have cash in your pocket or walk up to a ticket vending machine to buy your ticket. You could do it all from your smartphone securely. And then for transit agencies and cities, we provided a set of business intelligence capabilities to see how and where people were moving about the city, reduce their costs by a huge margin, actually. And so we were lucky. We started that company in PSU. The dean now, Cliff, was actually so kind to us, letting us basically build the company as our capstone project. And we did it. We raised about $4 million from the local angel and venture community. In full disclosure, Angela was one of our first investors and one of the toughest. She turned me down the first time I went to her. And I'm still trying to get better and impress her every time I talk to her, because she'll cut you off. But we were very fortunate. We raised just under $4 million and built the company over the course of 39 months to about just under $2 million in recurring revenue, 27 employees, and sold to Daimler AG, the maker of Mercedes-Benz and Daimler trucks. And so that was just a fantastically lucky and wild ride that had a lot of ups and downs. We went through all kinds of crazy stuff, a huge patent lawsuit, all kinds of drama that I'd love to tell you about. But long story short, we went from startup to corporate startup. And I had the real pleasure of working under Daimler for 4 years, leading their business called Movil, which was really their sort of in-house startup around the future of multimodal mobility as a service, or MATS. And so ran that company for about 4 years. We grew it to 150 employees, 22 cities using our technology, 7 million users of our applications. And it was it was the ride of my life. I really enjoyed it and learned a lot. But after 4 years there, I decided it was time to move on. I did, and I've lived the last 2 years in Berlin, Germany, which is a great city as an incubator of the future of transportation. Started a family. I'm now back in Portland, and I just jumped into a company that's literally about 25 people here in the Portland area called TTS, Traffic Technology Services. And TTS is really fantastic. They're in the connected vehicle space and autonomous space, basically bringing traffic signal data. So all of the traffic lights and signals that we take for granted have complex data behind them. We take that data, we aggregate it, normalize it, clean it, and run predictive algorithms against it so that car makers, fleet providers, and others can have a little app in your dashboard that shows you a countdown to when the traffic light will turn green or turn red. It seems pretty simple, but it's actually one of these hugely innovative technologies that takes away anxiety from driving, can reduce collisions, fatalities, and actually has a profound impact on fuel efficiency, battery economy, and the like. And so we serve currently Audi of America and Mercedes-Benz, which just went live about 3 weeks ago. So if you're lucky enough to be driving one of those fancy German automobiles, you will be using TTS technology. We're looking to expand the business and grow elsewhere. We're actually opening up China as a new market. So tons of stuff to get into, but I love transportation because it really touches all aspects of society. It touches, technology, policy, people, communities, and there's just so much opportunity to do good things with it. So I'm excited to be here and stoked for our conversation.
Great. So I'm going to give you a chance to pull out one super skill. Lori used listening as hers, something that you've learned over time has been just, kind of your ninja asset.
I guess it would be fearlessness. Don't be afraid of what's going to happen. Typically, what I've learned is that fear can be a real inhibitor to trying new things. And I think we collectively, we've talked about this, and I know you've run panels about this, Angela, but we have an ingrained sense of fear of failure. And I think that in the startup sense, in tech, rapid innovation, trying new things, testing out ideas is always the way to go. And so I think my superpower is I'm not afraid to reach out to someone and to ask. My dad used to always teach me, go straight to the top. He said, don't skip the middle layer, call the CEO, call the executive director, call the president, and ask them, and you'd be surprised how often they'd be willing to talk to you. And I've found that served me incredibly well. And I say, hey, I'm just a guy. And that's how it started with TriMet, frankly. I called them. I cold called the staff directory at TriMet to get my first deal, and no one returned my call. And I got to the letter S. And this dude, Tom Strader, like finally returned my call, agreed to have a cup of coffee with me. And he's like, and who are you? And, I said, I'm just a grad student, but I've got this idea. Would you meet with me? And so being persistent and fearless, I would say is the skill that I've honed to hopefully to good effect.
So Nat, I can personally attest to your persistence and fearlessness comment. It's something that I have always admired about you, and you have no idea how many times I reference it when I talk to entrepreneurs and students. So I may have seemed tough, but there's a deep admiration layer there. Trust me on this. Both of you, great advice for students and entrepreneurs and innovators. Go right to the top, use your listening skills, and don't take no for an answer. Fearlessness. And these students at PSU, I've worked with them before. They have some of that, and it's important to cultivate it. So thank you. At this point, you are both tremendous experts in the field of not just transportation, but very specific vertical expertise. And so over the course of the rest of our talk today, I think we're going to hit on roughly 3 buckets, which would be smart tech, electrification, and autonomy. I imagine there's going to be some crossover, and you will also have things to introduce that I don't even know about yet. So at this point, I'm going to suggest that we're going to have much more of a conversation between you two. I'll help keep us on track to make sure we cover some of the main buckets. But let me turn it over to Lori. She referenced smart technology in her with her career at DTNA. So give us some insight as to what's going on there and what excites you. And Nat, feel free to jump in anytime.
Yeah, absolutely. So my comments will be mostly around the commercial vehicle space because that's where my experience is. And I think the last year has shown everyone that the supply chain is broken and that there's really a lack of information in the supply chain overall. And so knowing where something is at and when you'll be able to get it has changed from where it was a year ago because things are it is an unknown problem to begin with that's really having attention put on it now. And when you think about what the supply chain looks like, so a good is manufactured often not in the United States, but I'll use China as an example. And it has to go from that manufacturing facility onto some sort of vehicle to a port where it's then put on a ship and then comes across the ocean and then either gets into a rail car or another commercial vehicle and generally goes to some distribution center and then goes from a distribution center to a final place where you pick it up. And every single one of those different places or different items have a whole different legacy computer system that they use, and none of them talk to each other. And so the biggest thing in the smart tech space in commercial vehicles right now is how to bring that layer together and how to allow the companies to have their legacy systems, but connect them all the way through so that you can see there's actual transparency in what's happening. And then I'll also go on a little bit further of where I think smart tech is really impacting trucks is in how the driver performance and even the emissions, what can be happening there. So you can actually start to give values of what type of a scoring system can you create around how a truck is operating. And so you start with by looking at what kind of engine. Is it a diesel engine? Is it natural gas? Is it electric? And then there are all kinds of things that influence the carbon impact. Is it a full truckload or is it empty? Are you driving in a consistent manner or you have a lot of fast accelerations? Are you using cruise control? How much idle time? All of these things are fitting into what the overall carbon impact is. And right now, there's not a lot of measurement into how it's impacting us. And what I will say is, for more than 10 years, the emissions have been so strong that in cities like Los Angeles, where the smog is bad, trucks actually, any engine built after 2010, the engine actually acts as a purifier for the smog in the air because of the EPA standards, but it's still not enough. And so these are the other things that we're starting to use technology to piece together to even improve the, how the impact is overall.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Yeah, I mean, so with respect to smart technologies, Daimler used to use an acronym that I think is a good driver, which was CASE, Connected, Autonomous, Shared, and Electric. And these were sort of the four big themes that were driving, the business there. And I think a lot of automakers and participants in the space. If you think about the amount of onboard technologies, communication capabilities, just raw computing power that exists in vehicles today, it's really astounding. It's quite different, much more complex than old beaters, as it were, the cars that we probably grew up driving ourselves. I would say one of the themes that came out of Lori's comments is that oftentimes technologists don't think at a systems level. They think about what their application can do, and they build it very well for that. Getting these technologies to speak to one another through common protocols, interfaces, standards is incredibly important. And that's the space that I'm actually learning a lot about and very excited about today in sort of CV to X, connected vehicles to everything, which is the notion that these cars and trucks have real-time location, real-time data about what's happening, and can speak to the infrastructure around them, whether it's the traffic signal as we do at TTS, or a railroad crossing, or even speaking to one another when cars come, let's say, to a four-way stop. Who's going first? What's the priority? The thing that's really changed in my mind is how this technology can impact safety. If you look at the 30,000 plus collisions and the associated fatalities that are occurring, in cars and trucks, particularly at intersections, this is largely preventable. And much of the technology that is being developed can really help improve that type of thing. We can do things like, as someone is driving and they're in what we call the dilemma zone, which is you're approaching an intersection and the light is about to change. Do you slam on the brakes? Do you hit the gas or the electricity? What do you do? We can detect that kind of thing. We can also send a message to pedestrians, to cyclists saying, hey, watch out, someone's approaching this intersection too quickly. So I think that, these technologies are interesting, they're fascinating, but they have real world implications and outcomes, particularly for safety. Climate was the other big piece here. The move to decarbonize our fleet and our transportation is absolutely crucial at a time when we're near the precipice, right, of 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and sort of the no-go zone, as it were, when it comes to reversing the impacts of climate change. I think that today, if you look at electrification, less than 1% of vehicles on the road today are fully electric. We believe that will change considerably. You look at announcements like GM, even Daimler, who are switching their tooling in their factories to prepare for this revolution, but it's going to take time. Electrification is, I know it's one of our subtopics, so we can get into it, but I am driving my first electric car personally, and I don't think there's any going back. I have to tell you, it's been such a fascinating and fun experience. It also has brought a lot of joy back to just driving itself. The last piece I'll sort of add in the opening comments here, Angela, is autonomous vehicle technology is really, I think, where a lot of people's heads are. Will we live in a world of robo-taxis and self-driving cars where it's like the Jetsons, we sit back, we don't have to actually drive? I think that the short answer is no. I was probably a larger and bullish proponent of saying it's coming, it's here, it's there. The more that I've learned, the more that I've gotten into it, there are other restraints beyond the technology itself, public policy, in particular, insurance, things of that nature that still need to be solved for. So I think autonomous vehicle technology is hot stuff, but as you get into it, it'll likely be a phased implementation that really starts, in Lori's world of commercial vehicles, trucking and the likes, highway, use cases. But when you're in an inner city, when there's all kinds of stuff, whether it's scooters or pedestrians or Angela's dog running across the street. These are the things that we have to solve for. So hopefully that's a sort of a good intro to what's out there. Of course, get me on public transportation at some point during this, because I want to wax poetic about everyone not driving a car by themselves. So let's talk congestion as well at some point.
Okay, that sounds great. I like the challenge of that. On her crystal ball with regard to connected versus autonomous, and she can go beyond trucking if she chooses.
Yeah. So the connected versus autonomous, it's such a great question. I think they both have to exist. And I think that all the autonomous trucks are going to be electric. So Nat, I fully agree with you on sort of how that is coming. But I think before that gets here, I agree with Nat. That's not a tomorrow thing. It's still down the road for many different factors. But the transparency piece of really sort of connecting all of these different disparate systems is a mandatory even to make autonomous work effectively. And so that whole transparency problem solving really needs to occur before all of the other pieces. But what I like is the progress that's being made in autonomous today is really more about safety. And, to Nat's point, there are so many things that can be done to improve the safety. And especially when you think about a truck that's, carrying 80,000 pounds, you don't want that thing smashing into the back of you. And especially when you think about interstates where there's been an accident and you don't see the accident because you come up over a berm or you come around a corner and then all of a sudden it's dead stop. With technology like that Nat is talking about, you can understand that all the cars are stopped ahead of you 3 or 4 miles ahead, and we can even start slowing the engine without the driver even being aware of or being able to see that there's an incident ahead. And so you're saving lives by just adding and improving the technology that's in the vehicle.
Yeah.
And so I think there is so much already that has occurred to make both our commercial vehicles and our passenger vehicles safer, that the real trick is getting people to use those tools. So in the Daimler line or Mercedes-Benz products, you have like an adaptive cruise control that basically can manage the speed for you. And it's amazing. I love it, especially in bumper to bumper traffic. But most people say, I can do it better than the vehicle. And the reality is that's not necessarily true, and that the vehicle can see and understands things because it's getting information from places that you don't even know it's getting it from, and can make decisions often in those stop and go situations much better than you can. So I think it's also like what Nat says, it's not just, is the technology there? It's, are the people ready for the technology, and are they willing to change their behaviors in order to take the full advantage of the technology?
Yeah. And maybe just to come back to this notion of connected versus autonomous. I mean, we've used the acronym CAV, connected autonomous vehicles. I think a dichotomy that I'm witnessing is that among automakers, sometimes the R&D and tech teams are siloed in the AV space versus the connected vehicle space, when in fact they should really be integrated considerably. And as Lori said, a connected vehicle really is providing a fail-safe set of protocols and data that can augment the visual-based learning and navigation of an autonomous vehicle. So if you're using cameras and LiDAR to navigate and to sense what's happening at an intersection, that's going to work 9 times out of 10. But when there's a big rig in front of you, a tractor trailer that's blocking the camera's view of a signal, when there's inclement weather, as we've seen, it's important that connected vehicle technologies be there to convey real roadside conditions and infrastructure constraints. And so CAV is really integrally tied. And from my perspective, safety is the driver. I think we started with this idea that, hey, it's about the cool, fun experience of an autonomous vehicle. But to her point, we can really reduce traffic deaths and fatalities when it comes to this technology. So that's a motivator for me. I find that to be really compelling.
This is a great conversation. I'm learning a lot. We're going to slowly roll into the next sort of segment. But before that, I want to ask some bigger questions that someone like me, who's a generalist, may have, such as implementation. So technology is adopted by early adopters. How does, the leading transportation planners and innovators account for the fact that there's going to be decades before everyone on the road is adopting that technology? So, I just yesterday had a coffee, socially distanced, with somebody who was driving a 1973 Toyota Land Cruiser happily. So just an example, but how does the planning mind account for not everyone on the road got the memo?
Yeah, great question. How will it evolve, and how will autonomous come into the market? And I think what you're seeing is a real shift from places where it makes business sense to adopting it first. So the commercial vehicle industry sees the opportunity to not only have a better business financial gain, but to improve truck drivers' lives as well. So there's a twofold that's in there. And so the very first pieces of autonomous trucking will come in a hub-to-hub model. So the trailer will be picked up at a distribution center and driven to an exchange point, and that's the hub. And the trailer is then put on an autonomous vehicle. It has maybe 2 or 3 turns. It gets onto the highway or the interstate, and it travels across the country via the interstate on a controlled place where there's less traffic that can come from either sides. There's less things for it to deal with. And then it gets to the other side of the country and it gets off the interstate and it goes to another hub. And then the trailer is then switched to a real driver who takes it to the last part of wherever it hits in its distribution. And so I think the way that you'll start to see it roll out is in these little increments where there's an actual opportunity for an improvement to be made today, but that's also helping truck drivers. It's not just about the financial bottom line, and it also gives us a chance to learn. And then on the passenger car side, I see they're rolling out and they're not necessarily calling it autonomous. They're calling it more safety features, but they have to figure out how they all work. So, the most annoying thing in my car is that we live in Portland and you see bikers all the time on the side. So I want to move over so that I'm giving the people on bikes more space. And my car says, you're no longer in the lines, and it tries to move me over back into the center of the lane on its own. And I'm like, no, I want to move over. So I will say the technology is not perfect, but it's still been released so that we can learn how to interact with it.
Great segment there. I'd like to turn over into electrification. And I'll just start with an opening thought that I think resonates with most of the PSU innovation community. At Clean Tech Challenge, where our innovation entrepreneurs are focused on for this particular challenge, many are very focused on different aspects of climate and the environment. It sounds like what you've said, electrification, the chief motivator or benefit may be environmental climate. So I'll invite either one of you to open up this segment with whatever thoughts you have on electrification.
Sure, I can open up. I mean, electrification of transportation today presents, I'd say, one of the biggest opportunities to affect climate change in a positive manner. It's also a profound tooling and industrial change that's going to have enormous impacts on our economy, on jobs, on skill sets, on training, and the like. Fundamentally, the over 120 years of automotive tech that have gone into the internal combustion engine has reached a level of complexity and sophistication that's really impressive. It's incredible what Daimler and Mercedes have done with diesel technology, with other internal combustion engines. They're quite efficient. If you look at electrical drivetrains, and if you look at the amount of components and work that's in it, it's quite simple. It's really far more simple to build an electric vehicle and to have components that can be changed out and in. The maintenance cycle on these cars and trucks is much, much less. So that's going to be a big retooling for big companies and for jobs, for factories, robots, and the like. That's one big thing. I think the other is that battery technology itself is, it's a gold rush right now. And the improvements that we're seeing in battery density and energy output are really impressive. Lithium being sort of the chemistry of choice, but there are also other opportunities out there. So I would say, on electrification, we have an infrastructure challenge ahead of us. If you look down the corner or down the street, you find a gas station. What is that going to look like in 20 years vis-a-vis charging? And, my anecdotal experience from a sample set of one has been that if you're a regular in-town commuter, an electric vehicle it's a no-brainer. It's a great choice. Vehicles, personal cars sit for 80 to 95% of their valuable lifetime. They sit in a garage or they sit on the street. And so, being able to charge in those nighttime hours makes a lot of sense. It's off peak. It works really well. It's, that range anxiety that we still have to solve for when it comes to longer trips and the like. I will say this, to your question, Angela, about how do we deal with old cars, not everyone having the new tech, et cetera. I think a shift we're also seeing is fewer and fewer people are wanting to buy their own car the same way as they did. It's not quite the same dream. So this rise of shared fleets and other services, Uber and Lyft and the like, I think we'll see advancements in the technology at that commercial and fleet level that normal people will get to access just via an app as opposed to outright owning those vehicles. And lastly, what electricity goes in matters. So just because the car is electric doesn't necessarily solve the broader, macro issue. And so we have to look at our energy inputs, how we devise and get the electricity from the grid to our vehicles. And as a former energy guy myself, energy developer, it's just been unbelievable to watch the cost curve on solar and wind to not just be competitive, but to now be cheaper than, fossil fuel driven energy production. So we're really in the midst of a huge revolution right now. It's quite exciting. But we still need to be pushing that cities, states, and our federal government are adopting those clean standards for energy production, distribution, and upgrading the grid to handle, electric vehicles en masse.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything Nat said there. And I think, what we just saw in Texas during the storm is a perfect example of our grid is not ready 100% today to handle the needs that we will have in the future as more and more things become electrified. And so there's a lot of work that's being done and still needs to be done to make those pieces happen. And I think from the commercial vehicle side, there's a lot that's occurring there as well. So, Daimler has an e-Cascadia, which is a Class 8 truck that basically has a 360 to 525 horsepower. So it's a pretty decent sized engine and it's got some power there. And it has a 250-mile range, which is, it's a great range, but it's not nearly far enough yet. So it's the starter vehicle to sort of be able to handle half-day runs that are going from place to place. Because if you think of an average truck driver, he's allowed to drive up to 11 hours per day. And if he were driving at 55 miles per hour, he'd be hitting around 600 miles. So a 250-mile range isn't enough for him to be able to really complete his run during the day. So those trucks are being used in the more regional applications now. But as Nat talked about, the progress on batteries, the ability to use fuel cells, sort of this whole combination of taking all of these technologies and saying, how do we layer them or how do we work together with them to get the advancement that we need so that we can electrify all of the vehicles?
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, maybe just picking up on one point there, those short haul trucks, the Amazon trucks, that's I think where we'll see a lot of progress. You saw that they're one of the largest investors in Rivian, which is an electric truck maker. And so, seeing in city, short range delivery and the like being powered through electric vehicle applications will be, yeah, it'll be great, huge.
And I think you're even seeing it into other places. I was recently approached by a person locally here in Portland who's looking to create a startup on electric engines for boats and saying,
Yeah.
how do we take this technology that's really starting to come along from the vehicle side and apply it to other types of vehicles and, really sort of be able to have the impact in all kinds of places.
Yeah. I sit on the board of a nonprofit here called Sustainable Northwest. And, we're trying to bring climate solutions and others to rural communities while propping up local economies and jobs. And one project that we're working on is actually doing a demonstration project of electric tractors. So, again, a very small point, but, can you convince farmers and ranchers that there's a huge upside to having, a full EV tractor versus your traditional, old school John Deere running, pretty heavy diesel. So yeah, it's happening all over.
If I were a clean tech challenge entrant thinking, what am I going to do next year? I just got to say already, people, from this great conversation, I'm picking up some really solid ideas and trends, from taking existing adopted technology for the roads into boats, tractors, very interesting. So I want to probe a little bit more on barriers to that miracle happening, which again, I'm a generalist. My information is probably really old. So tell me how wrong I am to think that the batteries themselves and their toxicity and environmental issues at disposal could be a barrier to the growth. And also, so two-parter, the second barrier to growth being how different the price of electricity is from region to region. We're in the hydropower zone, hey, it's free. That's not true in other markets. So how do you solve for that inequity when you're really trying to scale something globally?
So I'll start for a little bit on the battery side, and then I'll let Nat answer the second part of that one. I think the great thing about the batteries that are being developed right now is they're really being developed with intentionality of more than one use. And so, for example, the batteries that are starting off in a commercial heavy duty truck are meant to last for a year or two in that space. And then they're developing markets to say, where else can that battery be useful? Because it has to have a certain amount of ability to charge on a quick level. And as it gets older, it starts to lose some of its ability to, perform the way it needs to perform. But there are other applications that then becomes perfect for. And so really intentionally understanding how the life of that battery can be used to its fullest is something we haven't really done a lot of before. It's kind of like, oh, it doesn't work for what I want it for now, so I'm done with it. So we dispose of a battery. And now it's really about sort of finding what's the second, third, and fourth useful life of that battery to combat that point.
Yeah. Personally, I don't see the toxicity of batteries being a huge blocker to adoption. I think it's, in many respects, it's a little bit out of sight, out of mind. I think safety, of course, if you have the early lithium, composites blowing up and that kind of thing, that would be a big blocker or an issue. But I don't personally see that. Now, that's not to diminish the impact from an environmental perspective of lithium mining, of disposing of these types of technologies. But the value in the technologies is so great now that recycling and reusing of batteries has become, it will be profitable. And so on the other question, Angela, I feel like you're speaking to the political science nerd in me. There are much broader questions as to how we incentivize consumer behavior at that level. And, user experience, cost, and quality will be drivers across the whole spectrum. So if it's cheaper to fill your car with electricity than it is gas, we think we'll see people driving more and adopting the technology. If driving that vehicle feels safe, feels fun, and addresses the range anxiety that we've talked about in certain use cases, I think you'll see adoption. And that will come naturally with the evolution of the tech. But on the policy level in electricity markets, we have a big road ahead of us because every state is different, every region is different, as Lori brought up with Texas. And so having policies in place like renewable energy standards and net metering, where you can literally sell back unused electricity and energy to the grid, that would be a huge driver of electrification and vehicles. So, there's a lot to be done. There's also just basic infrastructure upgrades, particularly at the distribution level. And so that's expensive and that takes a lot of time. So there are challenges there, but I think for too long, EVs were looked at as kind of the futuristic nerd mobile, you thought you were driving a solar panel. And the more that we can get a sexy vehicle out there that feels, hey, this is like any other car, but it's awesome. It's electric and boy, it's powerful. The more I think we're going to go into mainstream adoption, and I think we're well on our way.
Great. I want to just open it up to you both to say, hey, there's this thing about electrification we haven't talked about that I want to talk about. Or not.
I think we hit a lot of the big spots. I don't have any more on electrification.
Okay, so this is the Angela bonus round on your feet before we go into the next segment. Let's just for a second talk a little bit about the equity issues and also the bias in technologies that have been well documented now in some other industries. So just ethics, right? What is the AI and technology in vehicles? How are the leaders of that anticipating and responding to potential bias, if at all? Or is this a problem?
Lori?
That is a loaded question. Well, I think that if you were to look, and I'll just sort of use the autonomous space, generally the majority of the autonomous code is written by like a small group of, let's say, 20 guys. And that's the basis for like all the autonomous code that exists. And then everybody builds upon it afterwards. I think what you're seeing in society is you're still seeing an overwhelming amount of men who are in the very technical spaces. I'm seeing more women walk into that space. It's not easy. I did it for 20 years, so I know what it is to be the only woman in a room. It's not always easy, but it's not always hard either. So, I mean, there's balance to it. Getting your voice heard. We teach a lot of techniques around helping others' voices be heard. So for example, if a woman or an underrepresented person is saying something in a meeting, you can just repeat it by asking the question, did I hear this right? And making sure that you're attributing that thought to them and attributing like them to have the ability to explain that thought further. And so I think there's an awareness that's there now, but I still see in this space a lot of the startups being very, I'm the person who created it, and therefore what I say works. And you're seeing a lot of those now not continue to get funded and really struggling where they have culture issues being as much a point as their technology pieces. So I think there's a long way to go in this space, but I feel like there is a small amount of change that's coming.
Yeah, I would say right on to all of Lori's comments. I think the measures of equity that concern me most within the transportation space are really about economic disparities and the affordability of the tech, really across income groups. So, if poor people cannot afford to have safe vehicles, that seems unfair, and it seems fundamentally misguided. And so ensuring that automakers are able to provide this technology at scale in consumer level vehicles is key. It's one thing if a Mercedes or an Audi, has the benefit of the technologies like my company is building, but we want to get it into the hands of everyone. And so there is a rise, and I'd say a segment of startups and companies that are going after kind of the retrofit market, which is a pretty interesting space where you can literally use a smartphone as a probe device in any vehicle, or even have a dongle in the onboard diagnostics, onboard data port, the OBD port, and bring some of those advanced technologies to the older vehicles. So that's pretty cool. The other thing is that if you look at sort of new models for how we charge for transportation, whether it's not just fuel costs, but charging by the mile for insurance, this can have a unintended consequence of, really impacting people who are driving either to multiple jobs or living outside the city core and can't afford to live close to the city center. And so there are these kinds of, measures of equity that need to go into the policy as well as the technology deployment.
Great point. And I would be remiss if I didn't note that one of PSU's entrepreneurs, Blake Turner and Turner Automotive, has designed a very compelling retrofit kit for exactly with that sort of, equal access mission. An old car can be retrofitted with a hydrogen to gas kit. And you can run it as a normal gas engine, or you can use the hydrogen kit, easy to buckle it up. And so that's an exciting thing that has already come out of PSU innovation in line with what you're saying. Worth checking out.
Cool.
Okay. There's one more kind of ethical thing I want to raise before we move into the final segment, which will be autonomy and, bonus round, anything you want to talk about, potluck, so like public transit. But the creepiness factor. So how do you deal with the fact that, already Alexa knows everything and my phone knows everything. Now every stoplight's going to know everything. My car's listening and hearing and gathering everything. How is the industry going to overcome the creepiness factor?
I'll let you start, Nat.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've already framed the topic, which is an important one, as creepy, which I think is unfair. I think that increasingly we're living, with a level of data sharing that is, creepy. Maybe creepy is a fair word. It's certainly prolific and it's pervasive. The question is, what are we deriving, or what are the outcomes of all these vectors of sharing our data? Amazon or Alexa often is promoting goods to me that I just bought, and it's like, if you're listening, I just bought this towel rack. Why are you giving me this, for the future? If, on the other hand, my car is listening and literally can apply the brakes to prevent an accident or a collision, and my kid is in the car, I want my car listening. And so I think we have to sort of, in broad strokes, yes, there's a creepy factor, but when it comes to the use cases and how that kind of data sharing is applied, I think there are segments who would say, I am comfortable with that. I want you to listen to help me. So that is key. I would say data and privacy standards, in different parts of the world are clearly different. GDPR, which is sort of the umbrella law in the EU, is far more aggressive and far more stringent in protecting individuals' rights than in sort of the very, free market mentality of the United States. I would say California has adopted a GDPR level type of consumer privacy law. Anything within the California market is going to drive the rest of the space, particularly from an automotive and transportation sector perspective. So yes, we should err on the side of rights, but I'm not the first person to just say, no, I don't want to share any of my data. I want to look at what the outcomes are. And I think in transportation and safety in particular, that's pretty important. It's also good at a system level for congestion management. So if you look, and we can apply, flexible speed limits, lane control, and even congestion pricing, we're going to have broad macro outcomes of reducing congestion, wait time, sitting in traffic, and the associated pollution. And that, I think, is worth sharing data to have this sort of utilitarian, lifting all boats kind of outcome. So.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Nat really strongly on that. So I personally do not have an Alexa or a Google in my house. We have phones, and I'm aware that they're listening, but we don't have the other devices. So when I'm at somebody's house that has it, I'm always fascinated, like asking all these questions. How do you do it? Because we're saying that we feel our privacy is more important in our home, but my vehicles have all of the technology available because it brings me safety and it brings my family safety. And so I look at it with a completely different set of lens. And then I also think the other part that came to my mind when you said creepy is the actual feeling of being in an autonomous vehicle with no hands on the steering wheel. And if you've ever sat behind in the driver's seat of a vehicle that's driving completely on its own, it's really creepy. And it's legit creepy when you start and you're like, how does this happen? But within a very short amount of time, your brain adjusts and you normalize it and it becomes the normal thing. And so I think that there'll be an adjustment period as we move from acclimating ourselves. And it's not going to be that hard. And I believe it will be quick because we're already acclimated to being in vehicles in the passenger seat or in the rear seats where we're not driving. It's just strange to be sitting behind the steering wheel and see it move and you're not moving it. So it's not as drastic of a change as some people will think it is. But I will tell you that the first time you do it, it is creepy.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm creeped out by is, I would say, the invasion of privacy and what's happening in the realm of social media in particular. I mean, that's that type of stuff and the outcomes we saw in the last election, with people being sort of stuck in their political silo, echo chamber of information, not a broad, transparent set of facts on which to make, judgments in our society. That's creepy to me. The car knowing where I am and conveying information about infrastructure, weather, congestion, and other stuff. I would say you have to try it, but I think the outcome is highly beneficial.
Okay, and I'm sorry if I teed up a trigger word with creepy. Let me give you the chance to assure me you already have, like, wow, I should understand there's a major difference between the use of technology in this environment versus some of the others. What is your confidence level that there will always be a firewall, in the vehicle space from some of these other more intrusive, pernicious technology, penetrations? Penetration. Sorry.
Trust, but verify, right? I mean, here, I think Lori and I have great experience working under German automakers who are at the head of the curve when it comes to innovation, but who also, systematically undermined public confidence and public trust in the diesel scandals, where they built software to cheat. So when there's a capitalist system and a private enterprise going after returning value to their shareholders, we as the public need to hold them to account, and there needs to be laws that sets those standards, and we need to test against those laws. So I'm a big fan of government having a role and of playing there. On the other hand, this technology is moving a hell of a lot faster than our public policy is. And so, it's something that the cars are getting smarter, the tech is getting smarter, and the AI in particular behind them is getting really smart, really fast. So I think that we do need to have leaders in government. I think it was a third of members of Congress still use a flip phone. Who are these people to be experts in guiding us, with new rapid technology? So it's a valuable point. I think we have to be fastidious. We can't just say, oh, it's going to be fine. We need to investigate and hold people to the letter of the law.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Lori.
I'm just going to say I'll build on that a little bit. And I think the other place where people get really concerned about the technicalness that's coming into vehicles is hackers. I think that the automotive community has done a great job of if a hacker did get in, they get into one vehicle as opposed to being able to take over every single vehicle at the same time. So there are barriers to make it more challenging. And I think of the world that we're in today, we have normalized drunk driving, driving while texting, not paying attention, all of this stuff. And the safety technology that's coming in these vehicles basically eliminates all of those things from being an issue. So imagine if, somebody is intoxicated, instead of getting in and behind the wheel and driving and killing other people, we don't find that to be a hacker. We're not afraid of that in the same way we're afraid of somebody's going to take over our car. Yet that happens every day. And it's really deadly when it happens. And so I think that the safety is actually a much bigger, stronger benefit to society as a whole. It's coming in a different fashion. And so we have to normalize what the new pieces are that are coming to us.
Yeah.
Great segment there. Okay. I want to spend a little time. We've hit on autonomy a lot of different places, but sort of our next big bucket is autonomy. So, that includes mobility as a service and a few other things we haven't quite touched on. So, Lori, why don't you, start us off with something under that bucket that intrigues you or is compelling for this conversation?
Yeah, well, even just starting off as mobility as a service and thinking about how our business structure works today. So an example is that you purchase a tractor, which is the front end of a heavy duty truck, and you own it. And so anything that happens with it in the future is your responsibility. So the original equipment manufacturer like Daimler is no longer sort of the liable party. But in the future, with autonomous, that technology needs to be monitored. And if it's a Daimler technology or whose ever technology, it's a major component of driving that vehicle every single day. And so I think there's still a lot to be developed in, will they sell vehicles in the future, or will you just pay per mile of usage of a vehicle? Does that then change? Does everybody have to have their own? Or do you no longer actually sell to large fleets? How does this come about in a world that makes sense, especially in the United States, where we're very litigious? And so the opportunities there are so strong. So I think it's really fascinating to think about just how the technology changes how businesses operate. And then the other place for me that's really fascinating is, as the autonomous continues to build, we talk about improving the lives of truck drivers. And so it's not only the safety components in them, but now we actually change. And if we go back to that hub to hub model that I described before, we now need 2 truck drivers for every load, 1 on each end. And we've now given him a job where he's driving a shorter distance. Maybe he's driving 100 miles and he's driving back and forth between the distribution and the hub place, but he gets to go home every night. And he's no longer out on the road for 3 weeks at a time. And he's no longer completely isolated and by himself for the major part of a day. And so I think that there's a lot of very humanistic things that the autonomous brings back in really good ways for everyone as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's time. It's reclaiming this precious commodity of our time. And so many people, and working people in particular, are spending hours of their day each day commuting, driving to work, driving to school, doing the things that their lives depend on. To be able to recapture 2 hours of your day, I think would be pretty profound for most people. Whether it's doing something else to earn income or educate yourself, read a book, spend time with your family. So I think autonomy itself, to me, it brings real value to our day-to-day experience in that respect. The piece where it will start, as we've talked about, is in commercial applications, in highway driving and the like. I do have a little bit of concern about what it looks like in inner city navigation, roadways, et cetera. But I'm really excited about what it could mean if we can reduce the amount of cars that are on the road. So if you're willing to use, a shared vehicle for some portion of the trips that you make, that's a big deal, because if we can pull more cars off of the road, we can do a lot of things. We can reduce pollution. We can go and reclaim infrastructure and land within our cities. So think about all the land devoted to parking today. If there's less parking, we can revitalize urban cores and urban centers. We can sort of reimagine what it looks like to be certainly in our cities. So I think there's a lot to be done there. There's also stuff like moving vehicles just autonomously at night to spots where people will then drive them the next day, micro mobility applications, placing scooters, picking up scooters, e-bikes and the like that can reposition themselves to where people need them. So there's a lot of good that can come from autonomy, but I would not say it's a panacea. There's a lot more to work on.
I'd love to hear your ideas. I think that all of us are big champions of great cities, and we've touched on the ways in which, the circumstances of the last year, but certainly it's not just the last year, make cities challenging, or at least fail to unleash their full potential. I think what you've done today is you've pointed out ways in which transportation, not just public transit, but all forms, result in tremendous human benefits, from better climate and environmental outcomes, from safety, individual safety, public safety, freeing up additional space by reimagining infrastructure. There are just all kinds of ways in which what you talked about today, even though on the surface it's all about tech and cool tech, it's really about humanity and saving our cities and not just our cities, but our people and their spaces, be they rural, urban, etc. So for me, I just want to thank you. I've learned a lot. I've taken away so much. Before we formally close out, I want to give each of you a chance to raise an issue that we might not have touched on, or if you don't have one, maybe just a closing thought.
Well, I feel like we've sort of run the gamut on the issues here. I guess speaking to PSU students, my encouragement, my message to all of you would be, think big and be bold. Don't be afraid of sort of the big idea, and please go after it. And if you need help, we're here to support you and to help you. But entrepreneurship can be a really powerful experience, and it's something that I think everyone should at least try. And you can do that in the realm of a big company, being a change agent within, as we watched Lori do in her career at Daimler, to starting her own business and doing it. So I think absolutely go after trying to do things. And when it comes to transportation, a lot of our talk has been about, the vehicles themselves, the electrification, et cetera. There's a whole layer of software services and other ancillary kind of opportunities in tech and in the business space that exist as we go through this transition. So lots of great chances to do good things and work with cool tech and improve our lives.
Great. I love that too. And so my message for the PSU students is to take every failure and to learn from it. And that when you're in the moment of failure and something's happening to you, you feel as if the whole world is crashing around you, and that nobody's ever going to look at you again and believe a word you say. And you have all of these emotions. And if you can give yourself 10 minutes to feel those emotions and then say, what am I learning from this? What did I do that led me to this spot? How was it interpreted? Did I say it wrong? Did I not understand all of the pieces? And then go back to use Nat's persistence and say, okay, I'm ready to give this the second try, the third try, the 54th try. Sometimes it takes that many in order to get what you really are going after at the end. And so when you stop and look at why something fell apart, you really learn the most by being able to take that, adapt around it, and then move on to your next thing.
Great advice. I will add a piece of my own to the PSU students, which is, you see from this talk how to unleash the big ideas, you both have to have a hand in technology and a hand in broader society and human behavior. If you are coming at this from a technical degree, I encourage you, however hard, to make room for a generalist course, something in human history, politics, ethics, society. And conversely, if you've got more of the liberal arts education, I challenge you to find an intro level technical course that you could fit into your schedule, just to learn a little bit more about that. I think, as with all important things, the truth is somewhere in the middle, and you'll be, extra empowered to have a little bit of each in your pocket. So with that, I'm going to thank our extremely awesome panelists today, Lori Heino Royer, Nat Parker. It's wonderful to see you and work with you. Thanks for your time and great nuggets there.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, that was great.